Hello, history enthusiasts and tech aficionados, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on a story you know, to reveal one of the most compelling yet often tragically overlooked sagas in the history of innovation. We're talking about the birth of television. But this isn't a story of a clean corporate breakthrough. This is an epic clash, a true David-and-Goliath struggle between a brilliant, self-taught farm boy from Utah named Philo Farnsworth and the colossal, all-powerful corporate empire of RCA, led by the formidable David Sarnoff. This is the story of the invention that defines the modern world, and the brutal, decade-long war fought in courtrooms and boardrooms to decide who would control it. So get ready to uncover the incredible true story of the lone inventor who stared down a giant, fighting not just for a patent, but for his rightful place in history and the very future of media. To truly grasp the magnitude of Farnsworth's achievement, we have to transport ourselves back to the early 20th century. Imagine a world without screens. It's difficult, isn't it? Today, we are surrounded by them, from the phone in our pocket to the giant displays in Times Square. But back then, the pinnacle of home entertainment was the radio. Families would gather around a wooden box to listen to serials, news, and music. The idea of transmitting moving pictures through the air was the stuff of pure science fiction, a fantasy on par with flying cars and trips to the moon. There were, of course, attempts. Visionaries and tinkerers across the globe were chasing the dream of seeing by electricity. However, their approach was almost universally mechanical. Think of it like a very, very fast flipbook. These systems used a spinning disc perforated with holes in a spiral pattern, known as a Nipkow disc. As the disc spun, each hole would scan one line of an image, and a light sensor on the other side would translate the varying brightness into an electronic signal. A receiver would have a synchronized spinning disc to reassemble those lines into a crude, flickering, low-resolution image. It was ingenious for its time, but it was a dead end. The sheer mechanical complexity, the number of holes you'd need on a disc, and the speed it would have to spin to create a clear picture made it physically impossible to scale. It was like trying to build a supersonic jet using a steam engine. The fundamental technology had a ceiling, and it was very low. This is where our farm boy enters the picture. Born in a log cabin in Beaver, Utah in 1906, Philo Farnsworth was not your typical kid. While other boys were doing farm chores, Philo was devouring every science book he could get his hands on, from popular science magazines to Einstein's theories of relativity. His family's new home in Idaho was the first he'd lived in with electricity, and he became utterly obsessed. He fixed the farm's faulty generator, built an electric motor to power his mother's washing machine, and generally tinkered with anything he could plug in. He had an intuitive, almost supernatural understanding of electricity. The big breakthrough, the moment that would change the world, came when he was just 14 years old. He was plowing a potato field on his family's farm, steering the horse-drawn harrow back and forth, back and forth. As he looked at the perfectly parallel lines he was carving into the soil, a revolutionary idea struck him with the force of a lightning bolt. What if you could scan an image the same way he was plowing that field? Not with a clunky spinning mechanical disc, but with something ethereal, weightless, and infinitely fast. A beam of electrons. He realized you could break a picture down into a series of horizontal lines, just like the rows in the field, and then use a beam of electrons inside a vacuum tube to read and then repaint that image on a screen, line by line, so fast the human eye would see it as a single moving picture. It was an all-electronic system, no moving parts. It was elegant, brilliant, and completely unprecedented. In that moment, in the middle of an Idaho potato field, a 14-year-old boy had just conceived the fundamental principle of all modern television, from the old cathode ray tubes to the LCD and OLED screens we use today. He rushed home and sketched his idea on a blackboard for his astonished high school chemistry teacher, a drawing that would, years later, become the single most important piece of evidence in his fight for survival. Having the idea is one thing, making it a reality is another challenge entirely. Farnsworth's concept was so far ahead of his time that the components he needed simply didn't exist. He had to invent not just the system, but nearly every single part of it from scratch. After a brief stint in the Navy and at Brigham Young University, where he continued to refine his theories, the young inventor knew he needed to find financial backing. This was no small feat. Imagine being a banker in the mid-1920s. A 20-year-old kid with no formal degree walks into your office and says he can transmit moving pictures through the air using something he calls an image dissector. It sounds like madness. Yet, Farnsworth's passion and preternatural confidence were infectious. He managed to secure the backing of two California fundraisers, George Everson and Leslie Gorell, who gave him an initial investment of $6,000 and a small lab space at 202 Green Street in San Francisco. The race was on. The lab was anything but glamorous. It was a small, cluttered space, a chaotic jungle of wires, glass tubes, vacuum pumps, and custom-built contraptions. Farnsworth and his small, dedicated team, which included his wife Pim, worked tirelessly, often around the clock, fueled by coffee and sheer determination. They faced constant setbacks. Vacuum tubes would implode, power supplies would short out, and their delicate filaments would burn out. Money was always tight, and the pressure from their investors was immense. They were living on the edge of failure, day in and day out. Farnsworth was the heart and soul of the operation. He was a master glassblower, a brilliant chemist, and an intuitive electrical engineer all rolled into one. He personally designed and built the world's first ever image dissector camera tube. This was the device that would fulfill the vision he had in the potato field. Unlike the mechanical systems that used a physical disk, the image dissector used a magnetic field to steer a beam of electrons across a photosensitive plate, scanning the image line by line at incredible speed. On the other end was his receiver, the image oscillite, a modified cathode ray tube that would repaint the image. For months, they struggled to get the system to work. They could transmit fuzzy shapes and blurs of light, but not a recognizable image. The investors were getting nervous. The dream seemed to be slipping away. Then, on September 7, 1927, everything came together. Farnsworth placed a glass slide with a simple, thick black line painted on it in front of his image dissector. He and his assistant, Cliff Gardner, went into the next room where the receiver was set up. Farnsworth tinkered with the controls, his heart pounding. He called out, "Turn it, Cliff." In the other room, Gardner rotated the glass slide 90 degrees. On the small circular screen of the receiver, a faint bluish line, no bigger than a postage stamp, obediently rotated 90 degrees. It was a flicker of light, a ghost of an image, but it was a victory of monumental proportions. For the first time in human history, an all-electronic image had been transmitted and received. There were no moving parts, no spinning disks, just the silent, magical dance of electrons. A few weeks later, seeking a more impressive image to show his investors, Farnsworth chose a new subject. It was an image universally understood, a symbol of value and commerce, a dollar sign. He painted one on a slide and successfully transmitted it to the receiver. That glowing green dollar sign image was more than just a successful test. It was a prophetic symbol of the immense commercial potential he had just unleashed and a harbinger of the corporate giant that was about to take notice. At just 21 years old, Philo Farnsworth had done the impossible. He had invented television. The problem was, he wasn't the only one who wanted to own it. While Farnsworth was toiling away in his small San Francisco lab, a titan of industry was consolidating his power on the East Coast. That man was David Sarnoff, the president of the Radio Corporation of America, or RCA. Sarnoff's story was the American dream personified. An immigrant from Belarus who arrived in America penniless, he began his career as a telegraph operator and, through sheer ambition and ruthless business acumen, clawed his way to the top of the nation's most powerful communications company. Sarnoff wasn't an inventor, but he was a visionary. He had been the one to see the potential of turning radio from a point-to-point communication tool into a mass broadcast medium, a radio music box in every home. His vision had made RCA a corporate behemoth, controlling manufacturing, broadcasting through its network NBC, and holding a near monopoly on radio patents. Sarnoff didn't just want to participate in the future of media, he wanted to own it, control it, and monetize it completely. And he knew that television was the next frontier. RCA had its own top-secret, lavishly funded television research program. Sarnoff had poured millions of dollars into it, establishing massive research facilities in Camden, New Jersey. His lead engineer was another brilliant Russian immigrant named Vladimir Zworykin. Zworykin had been working on his own version of an electronic television system for years. He had developed a camera tube he called the iconoscope and a receiver tube called the kinescope. There was just one major problem: it didn't really work. By 1930, despite RCA's immense resources, Zworykin's system could only produce faint, barely discernible images. Sarnoff was growing impatient. He had promised his board of directors a commercial television system, and the pressure was mounting. It was around this time that whispers from the West Coast reached him. Rumors of a young, self-taught prodigy in San Francisco who had not only developed a working electronic system but had been demonstrating it for years. Sarnoff, a master of corporate strategy, knew he had to see this for himself. But he wouldn't go personally. Instead, he dispatched his top television expert, Vladimir Zworykin, to investigate. In 1930, Zworykin arrived at Farnsworth's humble Green Street lab. It was a classic case of corporate espionage disguised as a professional visit. Farnsworth, proud of his creation and perhaps a bit naive about the cutthroat nature of big business, welcomed the esteemed RCA engineer. He gave him a complete tour, explaining every detail of his system. He demonstrated his image dissector camera, which was now vastly improved. Zworykin was stunned. He saw a system that was not only functional but in many ways superior to his own. Farnsworth's camera tube was far more sensitive and produced a clearer image than RCA's iconoscope. For 3 days, Zworykin probed and questioned, absorbing every detail of Farnsworth's groundbreaking work. As the story goes, upon examining the sealed image dissector tube, Zworykin remarked, "This is a beautiful instrument. I wish that I had invented it." He returned to New Jersey and reported back to David Sarnoff. The message was clear. The farm boy from Utah had beaten them to the punch. Sarnoff's reaction was swift and decisive. His first move was an attempt to simply buy Farnsworth out. He offered him $100,000 for his patents and a job at RCA. It was a huge sum of money at the time, especially at the dawn of the Great Depression. But the offer came with a catch. Farnsworth would have to surrender all control. His name would be buried, and RCA would take all the credit. Philo Farnsworth, the fiercely independent inventor, refused. For him, it wasn't just about the money, it was about his legacy. Sarnoff was incredulous. He famously stated, "RCA doesn't pay royalties, we collect them." When his offer was rejected, Sarnoff's strategy shifted from acquisition to annihilation. If he couldn't buy the invention, he would steal it, or better yet, bury his inventor in an avalanche of legal challenges until he was forced to surrender. The friendly visit was over. The war for television had just begun.
With Farnsworth's refusal to sell, David Sarnoff and RCA unleashed the full might of their corporate and legal machine. The goal was simple and brutal: to financially and psychologically break the young inventor. RCA's primary legal strategy was to challenge the very core of Farnsworth's claim through a series of patent interference lawsuits. They asserted that their own engineer, Vladimir Zworykin, was the true inventor of electronic television, filing his own patent for a complete system in 1923, long before Farnsworth's successful transmission in 1927. It was a bold and aggressive move designed to overwhelm Farnsworth's small company. RCA had a virtually limitless legal budget and an army of the nation's best patent attorneys. Farnsworth had a handful of lawyers and was constantly struggling to raise funds to keep his research and now his legal defense afloat. The fight dragged on for years, a grueling war of attrition. RCA's lawyers buried Farnsworth's team in paperwork, motions, and depositions, forcing them to spend precious time and money defending every single claim. The pressure was immense. Farnsworth had to split his time between trying to perfect his invention and preparing for endless court battles. The financial drain was catastrophic, pushing his company to the brink of bankruptcy multiple times. The entire case hinged on one critical question: who had the first workable idea? RCA's lawyers pointed to Zworykin's 1923 patent application as definitive proof. They argued that even if it didn't work perfectly at the time, the concept was his. Farnsworth's patent, filed in 1927, was therefore invalid. It looked like a losing battle. How could Farnsworth possibly prove that his idea predated a formal patent application from one of the world's largest corporations? The answer lay not in a high-tech lab or a corporate archive, but in a high school classroom in rural Idaho. Farnsworth's team remembered that he had obsessively sketched his ideas for anyone who would listen during his teenage years. They tracked down his old high school chemistry teacher, Justin Tolman. Miraculously, Tolman had not only remembered his brilliant students' designs, but he had also saved the physical evidence. He had meticulously kept his daily notebooks, and in one of them, he had reproduced the detailed drawing that 14-year-old Philo had sketched for him on the school's blackboard back in 1922. This was the smoking gun. In a dramatic courtroom moment, Tolman took the stand and presented the original 1922 sketch. It was a clear, unambiguous diagram of Farnsworth's image dissector camera tube, the very heart of his electronic television system. It was dated, authenticated, and it predated Zworykin's patent application by a full year. The drawing proved beyond any doubt that the fundamental concept for electronic television had been conceived by a teenage boy in Idaho. The U.S. Patent Office was forced to confront the undeniable evidence. In 1934, after years of brutal legal warfare, they delivered their final verdict in a landmark decision known as Patent Interference No. 64027. They awarded priority of invention to Philo T. Farnsworth. It was a stunning victory. The farm boy had defeated the giant. For the first time in its history, RCA was forced to do something it had sworn it would never do. It had to pay someone else royalties. In 1939, after exhausting all appeals, David Sarnoff finally capitulated and signed a licensing agreement paying Farnsworth's company $1 million. On paper, Farnsworth had won. He was officially recognized as the father of television. But the victory had come at an almost unbearable price. Philo Farnsworth had won the war, but the long, brutal battle against RCA had left deep scars. The decade of constant legal stress and financial anxiety had taken a severe toll on his health. He had developed a stomach ulcer and suffered a nervous breakdown from which he would never fully recover. The fight had consumed the best years of his life and diverted his focus from commercializing his invention. By the time RCA finally signed the licensing agreement in 1939, the world was on the brink of another global conflict. World War II put a halt to all commercial television production as factories were retooled for the war effort. This freeze had a devastating and ironic consequence for Farnsworth. His most crucial patents, which had a limited lifespan, continued to tick away during the war years. When the war ended and television manufacturing exploded in the late 1940s and 1950s, Farnsworth's key patents had either expired or were about to. He missed out on the immense financial windfall that came with the television boom. The very industry he had created was now dominated by the same corporation that had tried to destroy him, RCA. There was a deeper, more personal cost as well. As television sets began to appear in every American living room, Farnsworth grew increasingly disillusioned with his own creation. He had envisioned television as a powerful educational tool, a way to bring culture, art, and enlightenment to the masses. Instead, he saw it dominated by what he considered to be vapid sitcoms, mindless game shows, and relentless advertising. The medium he believed would elevate humanity seemed, in his eyes, to be debasing it. The story of his appearance on the TV game show I've Got a Secret in 1957 is poignantly ironic. His secret was, "I invented electronic television." After the panel failed to guess it, he won the grand prize of $80 and a carton of Winston cigarettes. The man who invented the medium was reduced to a curious footnote on a forgettable program. He famously told his son, Kent, "There's nothing on it worthwhile, and we're not going to watch it in this household, and I don't want it in your intellectual diet." It's a heartbreaking sentiment from a man watching his dream turn into something he couldn't recognize. Despite the personal tragedy and lack of widespread fame, Farnsworth's legacy is undeniable and all-encompassing. He died in 1971, relatively unknown to the general public. Yet, the principles he first imagined in that Idaho potato field are embedded in the DNA of our modern world. Every single television, every computer monitor, every smartphone screen, every digital camera, and every space probe sending images back from the edge of the solar system operates on the fundamental concepts of electronic image scanning and transmission that he pioneered. He didn't just invent a device, he invented an entirely new way for humanity to see and share its experiences. He gave us a window to the world and to the stars. His is a story of pure, unadulterated genius, of incredible grit in the face of impossible odds, and a cautionary tale about the clash between pure innovation and corporate power. He may have lost the battle for fame and fortune, but he won the battle for history. So, faced with the relentless pressure and the offer of a handsome buyout that would erase his name from history, what do you think? Would you have given up? Subscribe for more incredible stories, and we'll see you in the next one.